is the customer always right?
You're never going to think your product is perfect.
What are the biggest differences when founding a startup and working for a fast-paced one?
The one superpower that startups have over larger companies,
when to add a new feature versus refining your core.
Some things can be painful.
Today on UNinvested, I was speaking with Jason Zhang. In his mid-20s, Jason started a startup that went on to become $1 billion unicorn and has worked at multiple other startups like Upwork, StubHub, and most currently Mesh. If you can follow the podcast and enjoy this episode, please consider leaving a review, subscribing on your favorite platform, or just commenting for reach. Jason, you graduated in 2007 and you jumped into startups pretty quick. In your mind, is there a right time to jump into startups? Did you get some experience first?
That is a very interesting question. I probably would have told you something very different when I was 25 than probably what I have probably lean towards today. There's a bunch of benefits to being able to get into startups when you're young. I think you're not attached. You can be able to dedicate a lot of time to it, especially if you're a founder, early employee of startups. It's always going to be evolving pretty quickly. It's pretty ambiguous in terms of what you work on, and you're going to want to be able to dedicate a lot of time to be able to kind of harness that. When I founded my startup, I was in my mid-20s, and so I had a lot of that time to kind of be able to frame it. But I also think that with experience, you also start getting a lot better at being able to make the decisions that allow a startup to be successful. And I think the things that allow startups to really be successful is, how do you figure out what you're prioritizing on? How do you figure out what's important to work on? How do you figure out what's important to work on at that time and when you need it? And I think when you're younger, you are going to take you're going to get a lot of shots on goal and hope some of them hit. And I think when you have a little more experience, I think you have a little more accuracy. You hope you have a little more accuracy with your shots, and so you have a little more certainty that you're going in the right direction.
Looking back at the startup you founded after working at some huge, fast-growing startups, what do you think you would have done differently? Were there any specific decisions that you, looking back to I wish I had that one back?
The biggest one is just the focus on being able to get something out to market, right? I think a lot of people, when you're trying to get a product out there, you overemphasize a little bit too much on the perfection of it. You want it to be exactly what you envision in your head. And in reality, what you envision in your head and what customers actually want are almost never the same thing. And the best way to be able to hone in on what customers want is exactly that. Let customers use it. And it can be something that at least matches what they would expect. Even if it takes maybe 2 extra steps that you don't like in the flow, that's okay. And I think that's the biggest learning from I probably, I don't know, it's not necessarily a take back, but it's just definitely a learning from that experience over the course of time. Is get something out there, get something shipped. Even if you don't think it's the perfect product, that's okay, because you're never going to think your product is perfect. But you end up making a lot of decisions very differently once users start interacting with your product.
It sounds like you really believe in the lean startup model, ship something quick, learn from the customers. But how do you balance that trade-off with, pushing a product out there that's maybe immature and running the risk of losing a customer because your product just wasn't there? You could have spent an extra month, extra week on it.
There's all these various different definitions that the lean startup model kind of puts in. It's MVP, minimal level product, whatever it might be. I think my biggest thing is what is the main job that you want that user to be able to accomplish? And can that product, does it have the functionality to get them from point A to point B? And if they can do that, then your product is something that you want to be able to get feedback on, right? And I think that's the biggest difference. Is you could have spent an extra month because there was 3 steps you wanted to take out. Cool. But if they could get the job that they needed to be done, those 3 steps might not be the ones that the users actually tell you are the important ones to take out. It might be 3 completely different steps that you didn't think about at all. And that's the entire emphasis around how to be able to get a product out there more quickly. Is you don't want to spend too much time in your own head, right? You want users to inform you on what you can be. And yes, you do risk losing 1 or 2 users that get stuck in that flow. But I think like that is part of early stage products. As a whole, you have to be willing to take some of those risks to be able to get those learnings.
And does that same mindset when you're, pushing out a product initially is one thing, but then adding features once you already have customers is another. So how does that trade-off work? It's like, you could test, make sure it's not going to break, but, end of the day, it still might break things. So is that mindset still there, or is there extra caution?
It depends on scale at that point, right? If you're talking about when I worked at like StubHub, every single feature that you put out there is impacting, billions in processing every single week. It's impacting hundreds of millions of users over the course of a month. And so, yes, the downside is pretty big, right? Of breaking something. Most startups, when you like even first go and you're even in like your first 100,000 users, you're in your first like 250,000 users. Yeah, it might seem like a ton to that startup as a whole, and you want to cherish every single one of those. But I think like that is one of the things that like I think in the larger scale, your downside risk still is pretty low, right? In general. And like the one superpower that startups have over larger companies is they can iterate quickly, they can be less afraid to break things, and they can get to a point where they understand what users want a lot more quickly than the larger companies that they have to protect to that downside risk. Like if you break it too much, you will lose enough customers or enough revenue that you will start going on a downslide. And so that's what you don't want to be able to like do. But when you're small, you can take some of those risks and be able to iterate a lot more quickly.
What are the biggest differences when founding a startup and working for a fast-paced one?
Biggest differences depend on like when you join. If you are fairly early, call it like first 20, first 30 employees at a startup, and you are going into a role that you're more or less like kind of establishing like what that function and what that role is, it does feel very much like being a founder. You are able to make decisions pretty quickly. You are not necessarily going through the checks and balances that you would be at a much larger place to be able to make decisions. And so it does feel like you can be pretty independent in your decision-making processes. I think with being a founder, the biggest difference, to be honest, is the fundraising part. And like that, how much time that actually ends up taking away from your ability to be able to focus on product. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of like being at Mesh is like in my role, I'm able to concentrate and focus on product delivery, product strategy, and product quality as 95% of my job. And, the other 5%, I don't have to spend 50% of my time trying to be able to, raise money to be able to keep the lights on. And our CEO and co-founder and our co-founders do a great job of kind of being able to support that.
You mentioned an interesting point. You said, you got to go out and raise money, but there is the other side of, call it startups, and that's bootstrapping, not raising capital, because the incentives of the startup founder and the incentives of a VC in my mind are completely misaligned. You as a startup founder, if you bootstrap, you own 100% of the business, you exit for $100 million, that's a fantastic payout. You raise money, you exit for $100 million, you're a failure. So what is your opinion on that take?
One of the fundamental reasons that small companies take VC funding is to be able to grow more quickly, to be able to build more quickly, to be able to ship more quickly, because more people allow them to be able to iterate faster, allow them to be able to actually approach and go into markets a lot faster, right? And if you're in that space that you're able to do that without taking funding, that's fantastic. But traditionally, when you are following your revenue to be able to hire in, and you're in a fast growing pace that somebody else took money that can be able to grow faster than you, you're going to eventually at some point be at a disadvantage unless you can hit an asymptotic point when you are you're essentially you're in the upswing of a hockey stick, right? And those are not easy to predict when you can be able to get to those spaces, right? And so I think that's the biggest difference that I've seen before, is if you're in a space that like you feel like you you can be able to like grow at a fairly steady pace and be able to still make an impact in that industry and be able to make an impact in the market, or you have a niche enough product that like your steady pace is going to be able to win or be able to grow enough, then I think bootstrapping is fantastic. But if you are in a competitive and fast growing and lots of people are going to be coming at you with a lot of different potential ideas, with a lot of potential partnerships, with a lot of potential things, you want to have enough resources to be able to pursue the right ones, because you don't know which ones are actually going to be the ones that are going to be able to get you onto that growth.
In a highly competitive space, what if the space is massive and you're just trying to grab a slice? Do you still run the risk that you have to raise because someone could try to, come into your territory? Or do you think you can kind of startups can kind of maintain if the space is big enough?
I think if the space is big enough, definitely able to be able to maintain it, but it's not, I don't think it's necessarily, like people do traditional startup math for like VCs. They're like, TAM divided by, I can take this small percentage and like be able to generate X amount. I think all that math is, purely just hypothetical. I think it's very much like, what slice are you trying to take? What niche are you trying to like be able to solve? What problem are you trying to solve? If that problem is strong enough and you're solving it well enough and your customers are going to stick with you long enough because you're doing something for them that they can't find other places, then you're potentially going to be in a good spot. Now, if you try to solve a much bigger problem, and you will see other people try to get into taking slices of that problem away from you, slices of that market away from you, that is going to become things that you're going to have to be able to counter.
Seems like in your journey, you started a startup, started working at a bigger startup, then an even bigger one, and then you went to a smaller one. Is that, intentional? Or is that you just kind of naturally found your way there?
It was very intentional to be able to join Mesh. My last two jobs were publicly traded leaders in a space, and I think that gave me a lot of experience at what this looks like at scale, what this looks like at the optimization mode. But I think like the biggest thing that I really kind of missed was that rapid pace of development. Once you get to, we talked about this like earlier. Once you get to a certain point, the downside risk is actually bigger, is actually more important than the upside like potential with a lot of these companies. And like that's very, very reasonable decision making. That's very, very reasonable math for those companies to be able to make. But I think like with some people that are in product roles, you want to be able to like take a lot more risks to be able to put a product out there that you might not be able to prove with any business case that's like, oh, this is going to be fantastic, because you need users to help you be able to prove that case, right? And at startups, you can be able to do that.
When you're building a product, is the customer always right, or can they sometimes be wrong?
Depends on who the customer is. If their customer is a specific enterprise client and they want a very, very specific thing, and they are willing to be able to sign a very large contract for you to be able to do it, you might think they're wrong, and it's still ROI positive for you to be able to build something for that. I think if you are talking about a consumer grade product, there are definitely situations where what you ask a customer and then what you actually see, what like a larger scale of people do, are completely opposite. And that's where I think the art of product starts coming in, is how do you make those decisions? You have to use a blend of, here's the data saying one thing. It could be qualitative data, it could be quantitative data. And then there's also a product sense of like, is this actually solving a problem that's like big enough? Is this actually solving a problem that's important enough for these people to take it away from the traditional thing they're doing and do something that is slightly different than what they've done?
Do you have any examples of when, people kept asking to build this certain feature, but you were like, you look more at the long term and you ended up going a different route than what, the initial data was telling you?
Like StubHub and some of the places that we had like a lot of quantitative data kind of like pointing in that singular direction. We saw a lot of things like pointing to how we should be able to like potentially let people like select seats like in like a specific like arena, right? You heard that like quantitatively, or you heard that qualitatively from people. It's like, I want to pick a very, very specific seat. You heard that you would see that from like other partners. You'd be like, hey, why can't people actually like pick like very, very, very specific seats? And we started like going down a route of like building a feature to essentially be able to like do that. I think like what we ran into at some point was like both what you can be able to pick and what your inventory that you have available are insanely tied to each other. And if you don't actually own like the vast majority of seats in a stadium, people are not, even if they can pick a very specific seat, they can't get what they want. Because usually, I want 4 seats together in a very specific area. It's like, okay, cool. If you limit that down, there's literally nothing available that doesn't resolve anything to be able to pick something in particular. As opposed to, it's like, great, hey, do you want us to just be able to find you on XYZ parameters of like buy an aisle somewhere in the upper deck for this? Here's a seat to be able to go do it. I think that those were like some of the things that I think like we started like learning when we started building out a product that were actually like somewhat surprising. You see it and you get it and you think that people want it, but then in the actual like reality of when you like build it, when you doesn't match up to like some of the things that you have on like the other side, it actually fails to meet the final need, which is I need to buy a ticket to actually be able to attend this event.
When you're building the product and you were constantly talked about adding features here and there, but how do you determine when to add a new feature versus refining your core product?
Probably a better way to be able to position that is more along the lines of when is it the appropriate time to be able to build into a tangential like product area, and as opposed to continue to like focus and hone in on like your core product, right? And I think like that is not like there's like no one like true answer for that. I think a lot of like what you end up like seeing is once you have figured out that like, hey, this is maybe something that people want, you are getting into a world where this is maybe something that people will pay for, right? Whatever that something is, right? Now you need to like be able to like meet like a minimum like quality expectation like bar. They need to be able to do this regularly on above a certain rate. Like it's never going to be 100%, right? But should probably be above X, right? And your product, when it first like getting to that point of like what people want, it's probably not above X at that point, right? But the biggest question that you want to be able to ask yourself is like, how much do you want to be able to invest to be able to get to that number of Y that you think is like good enough? Or how do you take that product that you have and try to be able to expand it into like other service areas? Answer for that is different for every single startup. And the only time that I would probably like gauge a flag for it is if you end up starting to build a product that is very, very different than your core product, because the unknown costs with that are not just the time to be able to build something that is feasible, but now you're also needing to support and maintain something.
When you spend as much time building products as yourself, you must get to a level of obsession when you're building these products. Do you think startup founders can ever reach an unhealthy level of obsession?
You could definitely get to an unhealthy level of obsession. When is the best optimal time in your life to be able to like build a product? I think like now, like a lot of my life is around trying to find like balance between working. I have like 2 kids under 4, so I spend a lot of time with them. I have a lot of other activities that like allow me to be able to unplug from my like day-to-day like life or day-to-day work life, allow me to come back to it with like, you know, a fresher perspective around things, right? Whereas like, you know, when I was younger and it was basically just a startup and, you know, very few other distractions, I think like that was like a potentially getting onto like the borderline of like maybe being a little bit unhealthy, right? Because you don't have enough other things that are kind of allowing you to be able to unplug and be able to come back. Because I've been amazed at the number of times when I've obsessed about something and then step away for, even if it's like taking a walk or going and doing something for an hour and you come back, it's like, oh wow, like maybe I was just not going the right direction and thinking about this thing. Right? It's like, okay, cool. Like, let's write something else down. Let's like put something else down on paper and like be able to kind of like map this out. And I think like when you're too hyper focused on like trying to solve one single problem or the solution that you already have in your head, trying to like be able to execute that, you get into the problem where you know, that constant quote where it's like you can't see like you can't see the forest from the trees. Like you're just staring ahead at that one single tree that you're trying to go get after and chop down. Don't see that there's like literally a gigantic like opportunity area for you to be able to solve other things.
You've been in startups for a number of years. How have you prevented yourself from burning out when so many founders in today's world just burn out from startups completely?
I think it's like making sure that you have other things that are allow you to be able to pull away from it, even if it's for even if it's for a short time period during the day, or it's making sure that you're kind of protecting your own. You're kind of like protecting your own like time to like be able to make sure you can spend time with your family. You can be able to spend time with your friend. You can be able to like do that and not have to worry about that like interruption of that Slack message that you're going to be like, I have to leave like right now to like go do all these things. And if you can be able to do that, you can be able to push off that burnout quite a bit.
You talked about, walking in with a new perspective. How much do you allow competition to affect your perspective? Like, do you, some people say as a founder, ignore competition completely. Others, say the complete opposite. Where do you stand on that?
I think if you're not looking at your competition, you're not doing your product service. You're doing your product a disservice, right? Because you're thinking that the way you're solving a problem is the singular best way in the world to be able to solve it. And that is not necessarily true. Your competition can be able to enlighten you on different things that they might be thinking about, the way they might be like thinking about like solving something. And if you can be able to approach that with an open mind of that, like, oh, I hate that. I hate that, like what they're doing, and flip it into like that does actually seem like a potentially reasonable way to do it. Is there a way to be able to merge that into like what my customers want to do, or what my customers are saying, what they like want to be able to like approach? If you can be able to do that in an effective manner, your product is better for it, right? Because you're able to, I think like looking at competition is also one way for you to be able to step away from your own day to day, right? Like you're not staring at that tree anymore. You actually, it's like, oh, there's kind of a little grove over here. They might be doing something different. They're in the same forest, and maybe that is cool. Maybe that is reasonable.
Yeah, awesome. No, that makes a lot of sense. And when you're looking at competition, do you look at it from the lens of like, how can we beat them, or like, how can we be inspired by them?
I think there's competitors that are directly in your space, right? I think like when I was at StubHub, there's very, very clear ticket companies that are also ticket marketplaces. Like there's Ticketmaster, there's like, there was like Viagogo, there was SeatGeek, all those. So like those are like very, 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 very direct competitors, right? But then you're also able to like look at like, there's like indirect competitors that like were baseball teams selling tickets like directly, right? And they're trying to figure out how to like be able to like do this. And you're like, well, like they are kind of stealing tickets that could be sold on my site, but like, what if I could help them sell tickets better? Like that's actually a better like way to be able to like think about it. So yes, they're competition in the sense that like they're stealing ticket sales from you, but like if there's an opportunity for you to actually be able to help them succeed by making your product, by having them use your product and making your products as a whole better, then there's opportunities to kind of be able to kind of like sequence it. So there's the partnership angle, yes. There's the like there's like the direct competition, but then there's like the how do you see inspiration from like some of those other like product experiences that you could be able to adopt?
So taking a more retrospective look, you worked at, call it 5+ startups. What is the number one thing you've learned along the way?
At every single startup, probably the most consistent thing that I would probably say when at the end of being at that startup was always asking myself, was there a way for us to be able to iterate faster? Was there a way for us to be able to ship faster? Was there a way for us to be able to break the problem down smaller? I still do that today at Mesh. It's how do I break the problem down like smaller? How do I break it down into something I can be able to get out faster?
Providing advice to young startup founders, how do they go about breaking down and iterating faster?
I think like one way to be able to think about it is not everything has to be technology built. Not everything has to be beautiful. Some things can be manual. Some things can be painful. Some things can be, I just want to get something out there and let's see if anybody does it. Back to like my very first point, like, can they accomplish the job? Can they get to the end and they get an expected result? Can they get like the check mark, even if it's like completely fake, right? If they can get there and then you see a lot of growth and you see a lot of activity, now you're giving a lot of reason and a lot of data to be able to build something that is better, faster, easier for them to be able to use. And then also you're motivated by your own like operational burden. You're like, I can't like process hundreds of these anymore. It's like I have to actually do something, or like I can't keep up with this anymore. And so like it gives you a lot of motivation, but also gives you way more direction than you could have ever gone if you first go into like that world of like, oh, well, let me think about like the 15 different ways that this could go right or wrong for me.
Do you have any examples of a time you did something super manual before you went ahead and made it, built it with technology?
When I worked at a e-commerce company called Joyous, we worked with a lot of drop shippers, right? And so like drop shipping in e-commerce was basically you're never actually taking the item. You're essentially basically saying you're taking the order and then they are basically shipping it, but you're not ever taking like custody of that into your like warehouses. One of the, things that we wanted to be able to understand is like, hey, we're not the biggest platform in the world. We have, a subset of people that do care about like the way we do it. It was video shopping, online video shopping more than anything. And so like, what if we do what we're good at, which is making videos about these things? Can we be able to get drop shippers to like be able to join the platform, right? And we could have built the great and beautiful like, drop shipper portal for them to be able to enter all these things and be able to everything. We basically just asked them for is like, here's a spreadsheet. Tell me how many of these you have. Tell me what these are called and tell me what you want to sell and ship me one and we will make a video on it. And we did that for a few months. And we found out that a lot of people actually wanted to be able to use us. And it became so overburdened. So it became such a huge burden to be able to like actually do all this mailing that we were incentivized to be able to build a portal for them to be able to like kind of like manage this on their own. It was a lot of spreadsheets for a couple months, right? It was a lot of organizing a lot of this stuff for a couple months. So then eventually we were able to hone in on what we needed to be able to build that actually allowed them to be able to solve their needs.
That's awesome. I asked everyone the same question. Has there been any routine that you've maintained throughout the years?
Before having kids, the main routine I probably maintained was I would always carve away like my winters. I would probably be up in Tahoe or be skiing like a vast majority of the winter, snowboarding. And so like that was like something that I like kept for at least like 10 to 15 years. Now the routine with kids, very, very different. Now the routine with kids is like birthday parties and preparing dinners and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think like there's always going to be those type of things that I think like are good to be able to like maintain, but as life changes, I think like your routines also change a little bit.
Awesome. I love skiing. I'm so jealous that you have to be able to carve out your winters. That's just the dream. But anyways, I'm Sahil.
I'm Jason.
And this has been Uninvested. Thank you. This is a personal video. Any views or opinions represented in this video are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations we may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. The views expressed are for entertainment purposes only and not to be misinterpreted as actionable investment advice.